Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to prethink assumptions. My name is Rajat Sadana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Supporting me in this webinar, we have Harsha. Harsha is a senior subject matter expert at e-GMAT, and then he's going to make sure that you guys understand everything that we talk about in this webinar. At least most of you do. And then we also have Sandeep, who's a GMAT strategy expert. If you have strategy-related questions, he'll ensure that those questions get answered. With that, this is a free webinar. Already have about 100 students here. I expect to get 150 to 160 folks over here. So let's kind of get to know you guys a bit better. And then so you have this first question, which is when do you plan to take the test? And then let's kind of look at a second question, which is what is your target GMAT score over here? Let's get a response to this one. With regards to when people want to take the test, but the biggest group over here hasn't taken a date as of yet. That's about 40% of you. And about 12% of you are taking the test right away. That's wonderful. And then we have folks in between. Now, for those of you who have already made a mind, I have this curious data point that I'm trying to collect, which was, what is your preference? Are you looking for an in-center GMAT? What's your preference, in-center versus online? Now, this is a multiple response question, but I request folks to just choose one option, not multiple. So what's your preference? Do you prefer the in-center version or do you prefer the online version? Okay. All right. That is wonderful. We have about 50-50 over here. Half of you prefer the online version. The other half, give or take, prefer the in-center version. That is wonderful. Just curious, why is that? Why one versus the other? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here, but just everyone has their own reasons. What are your reasons to prefer either if you say in-center, what is your reason to prefer that in-center, or what are your reasons if you have multiple? If you say online, what are the reasons? Connectivity issue. Okay, that's for in-center. 8-minute break is now there in online as well, by the way. So from a format standpoint, the tests are just the same. Connectivity issue. Okay, online exam is supposedly more difficult. I don't think that is the case. If you go to a YouTube channel, you'd see at least 25 debriefs where people have taken their online tests and have done wonderfully well. And I know that that they've seen people cry when they come in and say, hey, the online test seems way more difficult. It truly isn't. No AWN online? No, there is AWN online right now, starting from 8th of April. So from a content, from a breaks, from a section order standpoint, the exams are going to be just identical from 8th of April. You'll get the scores right away from 8th of April. So, and again, if you want details, go to our YouTube channel. I've posted a video. A whiteboard actually is way better on the online GMAT because the physical whiteboard that you get is bigger than the scratch pad that you get on the in-center GMAT. So again, if you're saying whiteboard, it no longer applies. It applied last year in June. It hasn't applied since October. So yeah. And you don't get scratch paper, you get a scratch pad even in the in-center GMAT. So the beauty of online GMAT is you choose the board yourself. Okay. Distraction is something I can't do anything about if you don't have a place in the house or in your friend's house. That's true. MacBooks latest OS is not supported. From 8th of April, it is supported. From 8th of April, they're going into a completely new system. It's by Examity, and so it will be supported. I know today it's not supported, but from 8th of April, it will be. Because as long as you have a Chrome browser, you'd be able to do this. Okay, and yes, the online GMAT does provide the unlimited score sending piece. So for those of you who want to know, Sandeep, if you can put in or Harsha, if you can get the latest video that I created for in-center versus online GMAT from our YouTube channel, that'd be great. And if you can put it in one of the links pod over here. All right, with that, let's just go through your responses. Thank you very much for that feedback. Clearly, there is a lot of information that you guys have, which is old, it's no longer relevant. and that video should help you. All right, so with regards to your target GMAT score, an overwhelming number of you are in that 730 to 750 bracket. If you add 730 plus and the 760 plus, you're talking about 70% of the class. You add that, the 710, 720, it's about 90% of the class, give or take, and the 600 to 700, that's about 12-13% of you. Perfect. This is a fairly application focused session. We will start with some very simple question, then we'll go to reasonably sophisticated argument, then we'll solve two very difficult questions, fairly application focused session. And to make sure that you have that right foundation, make sure you can pre-think properly on complex arguments. We did send these video lessons your way, if you have not gone through these video lessons, they are a part of your free trial. Go through them post this webinar, and the benefit that you'd get from this webinar would multiply. Let me just hide this. By the way, Sandeep has pasted this video. You can just copy paste this, or Harsha, if you want to just put it in a links pod, that'd be great as well. And then we have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free algebra webinar tomorrow. Very application focused webinar, similar to today's webinar. If you've not registered for that one, you can click on the register now button, and in that we'll be talking about inequalities and absolute value. So definitely register for that. And then we have a free GMAT strategy webinar. That is next week. So if you want to need help building your study plan, if you want to understand why is it that some people study and get to that 730 score in 2 months or 740 score in 2 months, and while others spend 2 years, this is the webinar that will tell you. While some people don't, or rather many of you just give up on your MBA dream. So this is the webinar for that. That's next week, next Saturday. And then we have this series called MBA Analytical, where we've been asking our former students to come in and tell our current students about how did they get a top GMAT score, how did they get into a top B school. We had folks from Keenan Flagler and Harvard last week. Again, they're on our YouTube channel. Next week we have Mayank, who's from Haas, and then the following week I think we have folks from ISB and I believe it's either Stanford or Stern or Columbia. So again, you'll see a series of 8 webinars. We are planned a week in advance. You register for this and you get invited to this as well. Thank you, Harsha, for the link to GMAT Online Enhancement. With that, let's go right into the session. Very quickly, since many of you would be starting your presentation, your preparation right now, I'm going to just tell you a bit about how do you go about building your study plan. And a lot of you think about test prep, and I want to talk about how is e-GMAT different, and then the study plan approach will give you through example how is e-GMAT different from the other prep companies. When you think about architectures of learning in the test prep industry, you really see 2 different architectures that exist. One is what we call as a book-based architecture, where you learn. There's very little feedback during the learning phase. Pretty much all of the feedback is built into the assessment phase, and that's what we call as the book-based architecture. Essentially, if you're learning online using that architecture, you're learning in the same manner that you learned using a book. It's just online. The second architecture is that private tutoring-based architecture, where you're learning. When you're learning, you get personalized feedback based on how you're learning. A lot of what we do is built on this private tutoring-based architecture. And to illustrate that, let me just show you how we go about building a study plan. So how do you go about acing the GMAT? Let's kind of think about how do you build a study plan first if you want to get to the score of 720 or higher. The first thing is you've got to figure out which sections do you want to, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, where is it that you're going to spend time, how much time are you going to spend, etc., etc. Once you have that, you create this path to the goal, and this is what we're going to focus on. Once you have that path to the goal, then you learn the concepts that you need to learn. Now, just knowing the concepts isn't enough. You also need to know how to apply those concepts, and we're going to focus on that application in this session. And then you've got to get so good at applying those concepts that you attain a level of mastery that puts you in that 720 or higher. 720 is 94th percentile, which means you've got to be in the top 6 percentile of test takers worldwide. So you've got to get so good at answering these questions overall. So how do you go about building that study plan? We're going to take the case of a student who has a starting score of 600, wants to get to a score of 720. So how do you go about building that study plan? The first thing is you've got to figure out the areas where you need the most effort. So what you do is you quantify these starting abilities, which means you need to know how good you are in SCCR, RC, number properties, arithmetic, number properties, algebra, word problems, geometry, and PNC probability. So you need 8 starting abilities to begin with, not just your quant and verbal abilities, but your 8 starting abilities. The second piece that you need to do is you need to define milestones to really say, okay, these are the starting abilities that I have in these 8 subsections. What are the target abilities that I should have in 8 subsections so that I get that 720, 740, 760 score. These milestones are different for each one of you. We help about 10,000 students prepare a study plan every year, and those are more or less 10,000 distinct study plans. And then based on these milestones and these starting abilities, based on these two, you kind of personalize this piece to really say, should I be watching concepts? Should I be learning just application? Should I be practicing questions? Which level of questions should I be practicing? What should I be taking from that? That's kind of where you personalize your learning over there. So how do you quantify your starting abilities? The thing that you do is you take a sigma x mock. Why? Because your sigma x mock is the only mock in the world that gives you that starting abilities. It used to be that the GMAT prep mock, which existed in 2018, gave you these abilities as well. Unfortunately, the official GMAT mocks no longer do that. Then the second thing that you need to do is set milestones. How do you go about setting milestones? We built an AI-based tool called Personalized Study Planner that helps you build these milestones over here. What does it do? It takes your starting quant and starting verbal scores. It then gives you your target quant and target verbal scores to get to that score of 720. Now this part is also personalized. To get to 720, there are about 30 odd paths that exist. Based on your starting abilities, it chooses the most likely path for you. Okay. Once you have your starting and your target abilities, and based on the starting abilities in quant and verbal, it defines the target abilities in quant and verbal. Here you can see what are those target abilities that you need for arithmetic and algebra, and what are the target verbal abilities that you need. It then tells you based on your starting abilities, you see it on the left, and how much time you need. For example, for this guy, he needs about 1.5 weeks in arithmetic to go from a 59th percentile ability to an 83rd percentile ability. He needs about 2 weeks in CR to go from that 50th percentile ability to that 85th. Now, these 2 weeks are computed based on this particular student's time commitment. So if you were to commit more time, this would compress. If you were to commit less time, this time over here would expand. And then you get a personalized study plan. I know this is not legible over here, but in the app, you can really see, okay, how many hours am I spending on the weekdays? How many hours am I spending on the weekend? You can click on this, you can modify this, and the plan changes accordingly over there. So for those of you who need help with this, who need help building a study plan, you can reserve a slot over here. Those of you who need help with the Sigma X mock, you can look at number 3 Sigma X mock. Number 1, you can schedule a session to build a study plan. Okay, and again, depending on who you are, you might need 3 months, you might need 2 months. Some of you may need just a month or so to go to your target GMAT score. Okay. Also connect with me on my LinkedIn. I have about 18,000 people who are connected with me on my LinkedIn. We post about 7 articles, pretty much everything that's going on in the GMAT and MBA world, and a lot of practice questions on my LinkedIn. So for you, it's be a good way to connect with students in B schools. Also to really figure out what's going on in the GMAT and MBA world over there. Okay. With that, we are done with the introduction to this webinar. Let's go to the pre-thinking part over here. So how are we going to go about doing this? We'll first figure out how you currently approach CR questions. Then we'll go do a pre-thinking exercise. This is where we're building that foundation for pre-thinking. That's this part over here. And then we're going to solve 2 full-length questions. These questions are going to be difficult questions, uber difficult questions, the most challenging official questions that exist. And we're going to apply pre-thinking. We're going to prove to you even though these questions are very challenging, they seem simple once you do pre-thinking. You're able to cut through the clutter. You're able to see through what the answer choices are trying to how the answer choices are trying to mess you up. And as we do this, we will apply the negation test as well. And then we're going to talk about how can you be a champion pre-thinker, and where should you do more practice. Okay, so at a very high level, we'll figure out how you go about solving CR questions today. We'll then look at the pre-thinking approach, and then we'll look at what should you do next. Okay, a very intense webinar. If you don't have a pen and paper ready, I'd request that you get one. If you don't have a bottle of water with you, I'd request that you get one, because you need to stay focused. You miss one thing. Critical reasoning is one thing where it probably, out of the 3 subsections, is the most intense subsection, which means if you're a good critical thinker, acing SC and CR should be relatively simpler. If you're not a great pre-thinker, then you've got to put in the effort to get there. Okay, so let's figure out how you go about solving CR questions today. But before that, let me talk about what is pre-thinking. Now, pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in 15 seconds before you look at answer choices. And the reason why this definition is really important is because as a term, pre-thinking has existed in the blogosphere for a very, very long time. Unfortunately, it also means that there are lots and lots of preconceived notions about pre-thinking, a lot of negative things about pre-thinking that exist in the blogosphere. For example, most people think pre-thinking is the same as predicting the answer. No, it is not the same as predicting the answer. When we do pre-think, we're trying to understand the logic of the argument. Our goal is not to really figure out what's going to be there in answer choices. The second thing is a skilled pre-thinker is able to get to pre-think one potential option in about 15 seconds. The third thing is it's supposed to be done before you look at the answer choices. Okay. And this is something which is really important. Why? Because you go over here, you see other people talk about pre-thinking. And essentially what they talk about is predicting the answer. No, we're not trying to predict the answer. What you pre-think may not be there in the answer choices. But the very fact that you've been able to pre-think means that if you see another correct answer, you'd be able to identify it. If you see other incorrect answer choices, you'd be able to cut through the clutter over there. Okay, so with that, let's kind of understand how you approach CR questions today. All right. So which methodology do you follow? So there are 2 methodologies that people look at while solving CR questions. One is they read the argument, they go to the answer choices, and they do back and forth between the argument and the answer choices till they kind of narrow it down to the best candidate out there. The second is they read the argument, they focus on pre-thinking, then they go to the answer choices, and they come back to the argument only if it's needed. So which of these 2 methodologies do you follow while solving questions? Let's get a few more responses. I have 150 students in the webinar. Which of these 2 methodologies do you follow? Let's get at least 80 responses, guys. I mean, you're here, you're spending time. The way you get the most out of this session is by participating. And you get a bit of exercise, but more than that, you get a sense of, hey, what am I doing and what I need to do? And that, I think, is very valuable feedback. So about 60% of you follow methodology 1. 40, it's 56-44 right now, methodology. That's good. Okay, so that is good. I want to make sure that as we go on with this session, I want more and more of you to follow methodology 2, which is the pre-thinking method over here. Now, pre-thinking is not a magic bullet. It's a logical approach to answering questions, and I want to make sure that that you kind of have. I want to set the expectation right, which is that, hey, we are not trying to teach you a trick over here. At e-GMAT, we never teach tricks. That's against our DNA. So in this webinar, what we're going to focus on is we will teach you pre-thinking, but we'll also focus on building some really important skills which will help you do well in SC, CR, and RC. And the most important skill over there is visualize. A lot of people, when they approach verbal questions, they approach them very mechanically. They really just focus on just really saying, okay, I've read an SC question. Let's just kind of focus on what are the errors over there, without really taking the time to read the sentence, to understand what the sentence is talking about, to understand how the sentence is using modifiers and lists to construct meaning, because all they want to do is get done with that question and move forward. Is there anyone who does that? I mean, does that sound like you? And again, I'm not identifying you guys over here, so it's a very low risk environment. Okay. If you want to excel on the GMAT, learn to love learning. That's something that I would say. If you learn to love learning, those high scores will come naturally. And one of the means to learn to love learning is to learn to visualize, which means when you're reading a sentence, learn to appreciate the beauty with which the sentence is constructed. When you're reading an argument, focus on and visualize what the author is trying to claim in that argument. And one way of doing that is to express the conclusion in your own words, especially when you're in that learning phase. Remember, how many of you really say, okay, I've been studying CR for 15 days, or I've been studying verbal for 15 days, my timing should be in position. I should be able, if I expect to answer questions in a minute 30, then on the 10th day or on the 8th day, I should be at a minute 30 for an SC question, 2 minutes for a CR question. How many of you think about that? How many of you think about that and do it with that mindset, and you solve questions with that mindset? That is what I call as a catastrophic mindset. Early on in your preparation, you've got to go through content with a mindset of learning, not with a mindset of achieving perfect timing. Timing is something that comes automatically if you're learning things the right way. Most people who learn things the right way don't have to worry about timing. Most people who worry about timing actually end up failing on timing. So that's something which I can tell you. And if you worry about learning rather than worrying about timing, you will not have to worry about timing. A month and a half into your preparation, you will see that timing improve automatically. It's the same way as do you do anything, whether you learn how to tie laces, whether you learn how to drive. Remember, the first time you learned how to drive, you had to consciously do a ton of things. Just getting started took a lot longer. There was that inertia. But once you learned how to drive, just sit in, you'd still be eating your sandwich, drinking your coffee, and then you just go ahead, because your brain would automatically know you've got to look on the side. Your brain would automatically know, okay, I need to make sure that everyone in the car is seated before I go from parking to drive, and so on and so forth. So focus on learning rather than focusing on timing right from the very beginning. Okay. The second thing that we're going to focus on is learning the logic that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion. It's really important to do that. If you don't understand what's the reason that the author is using to justify his claim, a conclusion is always a claim, then you won't be able to get to the correct answer. And the third piece then we're going to really look at is formulating the falsification question, which we often call the pre-thinking question. Now, we use pre-thinking for every question type in CR, whether it's assumption, strengthen, weaken, evaluate, complete, logically complete, boldface, and so on and so forth. And we use a very similar way to pre-think in this. So skills that you develop over here, which is the ability to visualize, which is the ability to understand the author's logic, will help you in every aspect of pre-thinking. Okay. With that, let's kind of understand what an assumption is. And to make sure that we understand what an assumption is, I'm going to give you a very, very simple passage over here. And let's kind of have that very simple passage. And I want you to tell me, what does the author assume over here? Here is the passage in front of you. What does the author assume in this passage? Why don't you put your answers in, press enter. The moment you press enter, I will get your response. And then from that point on, once I have 30 to 40 responses, I'll broadcast results. Okay, I have about 15 responses, 20 responses. Let me broadcast results. Guys, don't put your responses in the Q&A pod. Q&A pod is for your questions over here. So yes. So all right, most of you got the correct answer, which is 500 is not enough for an Ivy League college. Ivy League schools require the score higher than 500. That is good. Some of you have really gone a step further, which is that the author assumes that Joe wants to get into an Ivy League college, and yes, while that may seem like the correct assumption, I think that is not how CR arguments constructed. But let's not go there. Most of you got it right. So what's happening? The author gives you this data point, which is that, hey, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, and then based on that, the author makes a claim. This conclusion is a claim that he will not get. He makes a prediction. He says he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. And while making that jump, he has an assumption built into that jump, which is that a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League college. Most of you got it. This is something that you think about day in and day night. It kind of proves that if you comprehend the argument really well, an assumption is a very natural piece. You guys get that naturally as long as you comprehend it. Okay. Now, one piece that I want to make sure that you understand is this piece, someone like Joe. Why? Because the assumption is always tied to the conclusion. And in the conclusion, the author really says he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. The author is not saying the Prince of Saudi Arabia with a score of 500 will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So always focus on what the conclusion is talking about, accordingly frame your assumption. But good job on getting the logic over here. So with that, can you guys tell me what is an assumption? What's the definition of an assumption? What is an assumption? Can you type it out? Okay, a likely prediction, all right, unstated belief. All right. Something that needs to be true. Unstated info that does not mention explicitly, but there's a logic for his conclusion. Apparent facts. Okay. All right. So some of you, some responses, really good responses, right on the money. Other responses, I'd say, are around the piece, which needs to be. Some of you have said that, hey, it's something which is apparent. Most good assumptions are not super apparent, which is why people falter on them. An unstated belief which has to be true, really great response over there. Something that is not stated, a partial response in line with it. So an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Okay. So an unstated idea means that you should not be able to infer the information in the assumption from the argument itself. And then it must satisfy that must be true condition. That is really important. If it doesn't satisfy that must be true condition, then it's not an assumption. Okay. Two characteristics of an assumption. It's an unstated idea. Now, some of you really said it's a belief. An assumption need not be a belief. A belief is in the same category as a claim category. An assumption can be a fact as long as it's information that you can't infer from the factual part of the argument. That's okay. It can be either a fact or a claim. Doesn't need to be one or the other. Okay. The most important thing that's tested when it comes to the assumption is it must be true test. 90% of assumption questions test this must be true test, and we're going to talk about what that is. Okay. So a correct assumption satisfies these two characteristics. One is it provides new information. The second is it satisfies this must be true test. Now I want you to be able to understand what this must be true test is, and I want to visualize I want to help you visualize this with this thing. Consider this argument to be this house over here, where the roof is the conclusion. Okay, so now remember, and you have these three supporting statements, which are these three pillars. Now remember, the goal of the argument is to uphold the conclusion, to further the conclusion. That's why the author writes this argument over here. And these three statements, keep the conclusion strong. But not each one of these three statements isn't a necessary statement, which means it isn't a necessary pillar. Maybe you can actually take these two out. The roof will still stay upright, The only pillar which is a necessary pillar or an essential pillar is the middle pillar, which means that hey, this is the one that is an assumption. If you take this out, this roof will cave in. Okay, and so what is an assumption? When you think of an assumption, think of it as an essential pillar that is required for this roof to stay upright. The reason why I'm saying that is when we solve more challenging assumption questions, you're going to sometimes see these answer choices that seem like the correct assumption, but they're not going to be the correct assumption. And these are, and those confusing answer choices are more often these supporting pillars. In fact, we'll solve an official question today where you'll have 4 answer choices that would be strengtheners. Supporting pillars are the same as strengtheners, but only one of them is going to be the correct assumption. And we're going to see that distinction over there. So it's really important to understand that must be true if you want to understand the assumption piece. The other piece which is there is that once you understand what an assumption is, answering strengthen weaken questions becomes a cakewalk. Okay. So what does must be true mean? Must be true means that if the information provided by the assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true, or the conclusion breaks down. The roof breaks down, the conclusion breaks down. Okay. Or which, if you translate this, it just goes into the assumption must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. For the roof to remain upright, the essential pillar must be there. Okay, so let's kind of understand this must be true piece over here, and we're going to use the same argument that you guys did so well on to prove the correct answer choice that you came up with is essentially one that satisfies that must be true condition. So what does destroying the conclusion mean, or how can this conclusion be destroyed? We just look at this piece over here and let's kind of destroy this conclusion. This conclusion will be destroyed if Joe gets an admission into an Ivy League college with this score of 500. Does everyone agree? If Joe gets in with the score of 500, that conclusion will be destroyed? Yes, no? You can type that yes, no over here. Yeah, right? If Joe gets in, the author cannot say that he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. Okay. So let's evaluate whether the answer choice that you came up with or the answer choice that I came up with, which kind of is the same answer choice, whether that satisfies that must be true condition. This was the answer choice that came up with that we came up with. A score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Let's see if this must be true. Now, to see if this must be true, we've got to figure out what happens when this answer choice is not true. Now, when you say a statement is not true, by definition, what you're also saying is that its negated instance becomes true. And I'm going to explain that why this happens. So when you say that this statement is not true, you're also saying that this statement is true, which is that a score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, if this statement becomes true, then what happens to my conclusion? Does my conclusion break down? Absolutely, it does break down. Why? Because if the score of 500 becomes acceptable, then the author cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. The author's claim is gone. Can you see how our correct answer choice satisfies that must be true condition? Fairly simple. This is kind of applying the negation test. Okay. Now, let's kind of ask this. Some of you may be saying, how can you really say if a statement is not true, its negated version automatically becomes true? Let's kind of take some examples. If you say a statement, Harvard has the best MBA program, and if you say that statement is not true, then by definition, what you're saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or an MBA program that is at the same level or as good as Harvard or better than Harvard exists. Are you not saying that by default? Yes, no? If you say, hey, this statement is not true, then you're also saying that this statement is true, right? So, which means that if you say a statement is not true, by definition, you are also saying that its negated version is true. Just for those of you who want to think about inferences, this is an inference that you can draw from it. Let's kind of talk about John runs faster than David. If you say that statement is not true, by definition, what you're also saying is that John does not run faster than David, or David is as fast or faster than John. Right? Right? You're also saying that. So, Arun, this as good as is covered over here. Okay. So this is what must be true. is. And the reason why we say it must be true, or the reason why we have the negation test that works is because of the definition of assumption. The beauty of critical reasoning is if you understand these small things, which is, a lot of what you do in critical reasoning is very much like physics, by the way. If you understand the definition in physics, you can pretty much do anything over there. So if you understand the definition of assumption, you can pretty much solve any assumption question if you have the ability to visualize, if you approach it logically in a methodical fashion, and if you have an understanding of English. Okay, this is not rocket science. This is being methodical. This is about forcing yourself to think about things. If you do that, CR is very conquerable. Okay, let's kind of also talk about how this works the other way. How does this help you figure out which answer choice is the incorrect answer choice? Which means if an answer choice is not must be true, or if it's an incorrect answer choice, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of the negated instance of that answer choice. Let's kind of see how that happens over here. Okay. We're going to evaluate this answer choice, which is a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. So let's kind of look at this over here and ask ourselves, is that must be true? Will the conclusion break down if this particular statement is no longer true? Let's apply the negation test here. So if this statement is no longer true, then its negated instance becomes true, which means a score of 500 now becomes a good score. Now, if that happens, then does Joe get admission? Absolutely not. Why? Because as per the argument, and you can see the argument over here, the claim is not predicated on whether the score of 500 is a good or a bad score. It's, you can replace 500 by 700. The logic of the argument would remain the same. Okay. So even if a score of 500 is called a good score, even then Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college, which means my conclusion will not break down, which means that this is not a correct answer choice. It does not satisfy the must be true test over here. Okay. We have some other pieces over here which you can understand this. But this is a brief primer on how you go about approaching assumption questions, what an assumption is. You have, I hope, some sort of an idea of what an assumption is. You have some sort of a clarity on what an assumption is. For those of you who still have doubts, as we solve the next sort of 4 questions, you'd see those doubts dispel away. Okay. But again, remember, if you want to get the most out of the session, do things slowly. Focus on visualizing the conclusion. Focus on visualizing that logic of the argument, and then focus on formulating the falsification question. Which again, if you've joined recently, make sure you have a pen and paper ready. Make sure you have a bottle of water. Okay. The other piece that I want to make sure you understand is understanding this must be true condition. It helps you narrow down. For the correct answer choice, the conclusion will break down in the presence of the negated version of this answer choice. Hold on. What just happened? How did it go to the first slide over here? Just 1 second, guys. I need to get to the right slide. Apologies. Yes, this is good. So for the incorrect answer choice, the conclusion will continue to hold true even when you negate this answer choice. So that must be true helps you narrow down, get to the correct answer. This is just a foundation. This is still not the pre-thinking method, by the way. Now let's learn pre-thinking. Now you have that foundation. You are now warmed enough, prepped enough to learn pre-think. Okay, so how are we going to go about doing this? We're going to do baptism by fire, which means that I'm going to give you an argument. I'm going to force you to pre-think. You now have an understanding of what an assumption is. Then I'm going to go about, so I'm going to make you pre-think. Then I'm going to really talk about how I go about pre-thinking. What does this visualization mean? And then we're going to evaluate some of your submissions over here. That's 1, 2, and 3. Okay. With that, let's get the argument in place. Get a pen and paper. I'm going to give you an argument. There's not going to be any answer choices. It's a pure argument over there. All you have to figure out is what is the assumption. Okay. What is the assumption? Here is the argument. I'm going to remove broadcast results. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. You have to tell me what does the author assume over here. I'm going to mute myself for those 3 minutes. All right, we have another 30 seconds. Get those responses in, guys. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. I'm going to broadcast the results so that you guys can see how each one of you has responded. First of all, I want to thank you guys for putting in these answers. I want to congratulate you guys for those of you who are brave enough to put in those answers. It takes a certain amount of courage to pre-think and put your answers in here, and
Hey guys, Rajat just had a small internet issue. While he's reconnecting, let me take over. So, as we were discussing, it takes a lot of courage to put in your answers here, given the fact that you might be wrong. So, let's talk about how we go about solving a question like this. So, how many of you found this exercise to be difficult of coming up with your own pre-thinking? Let me put that to a yes/no poll. How many of you found a bit of difficulty in doing this? Because for some of you, this might be the first time that you're doing this, right? So you see a 50-50 split there. Some of you definitely had some difficulty with this. Rajat, are you back? Do you want to take over if you're back?
yes, thank you, Harsha. Let me just make sure my microphone's the correct microphone. Yes, it is. Um, over here, and thank you for that feedback, and thank you for taking over, Harsha. It's my internet connection. My primary internet got lost, so I don't know what happens. I'm on my secondary internet. Is the audio still good? Let's just clear all answers because I'm on my secondary internet, which again is fast enough, but I want to make sure the audio is good. Perfect. Thank you. For 90% of you, the audio seems to be pretty good. That's wonderful. Or for 100%. So essentially, 5 of you were perfect. The another 10 of you who were on the right logic over there, but the other ones were not. So let's kind of focus on getting this over here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to understand what that conclusion is. Some of you probably have not identified the conclusion. Then we're going to visualize that conclusion. Then we'll look at the data that the author provides to make the conclusion believable. How does the author support this conclusion? And then we're going to formulate what we call as a pre-thinking question, and we're going to then once we formulate this pre-thinking question, and if we've already done the visualization correctly, we should be able to come up with correct assumptions right away. So with that, let's kind of figure out which statement is the main conclusion over here. So I'm going to show a poll and in which I'm going to ask you which statement is the main conclusion. So to understand the falsification method, let's kind of understand what an assumption is. An assumption, we said, is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. And that visualization that we talked about earlier, that assumption being that essential pillar that keeps that roof upright, which means that if that essential pillar is not there, which is the assumption, the conclusion will break down. So if you want to figure out where to put that essential pillar, if you were building a house and you wanted to figure out where to put that essential pillar, you kind of figure out where the roof is caving in and put that pillar over there. Or in other words, an assumption is built in on those scenarios where the conclusion does break down. And if you figure out where the conclusion breaks down, all you have to do is then formulate an assumption which says that that scenario is not possible in the context of this argument. That's all that you need to figure out. Okay. So to figure out what an assumption is, let's figure out, given the information that we have in the passage, where does my conclusion break down? Once I know this, I can really figure out what an assumption needs to be. Does that make sense? Let's just put in a yes, no poll question. Does that make sense? Right? Philosophically, that would make sense. I'm going to apply this and it's going to make sense again. So the question that we have to ask is, under what circumstances means situations, scenarios, given the facts in the argument, will my conclusion break down? And this question is going to remain the same for every assumption question. This is what we're going to ask. It's not going to change whether it's a claim or a prediction, whether it's a causal argument. This question doesn't change. So write this down overall. So let's look at this argument. This is the argument that we gave to you. And I have divided this argument into 3 statements. I want you to tell me which statement out of these 3 statements is the main conclusion. Now this poll has 4 statements. I reuse this poll again and again. So why don't you tell me, according to you, which statement you believe is the main conclusion? Don't use statement 4 because statement 4 doesn't exist over here. Use statement 1, 2, or 3. Which statement, according to you, is the main conclusion? And I expect about 100 results. I have 140 people in the webinar. Let's get at least 100 responses. Which statement is the main conclusion? What is it that the author wants you to believe? Okay, I have about 65 responses. Let's get to 80 first. I have 85 responses. Let's get to 90. The question is, which statement is the main conclusion? Come on, guys, you solve this argument. You know that a statement has to be the main conclusion. It should be fairly simple for you. You made that decision while solving the argument. 3, 2, and 1 more response to 100. 1 more, 99 responses. Good, 100 responses over here. Let's broadcast the results. And here you see how split this entire class is. Half of you think that statement 2 is the main conclusion, and half of you are correct. Statement 2 is indeed the main conclusion, but the other half is wrong. What's the definition of the main conclusion? The definition of the main conclusion is what is it that the author wants to assert. And when you look at this argument, the author wants to assert statement 2, which is a difference between the people in the tenure system and full-time lecturers is because of the reward system for the former. So what the author wants you to believe is that it's the reward system that is there. So essentially think about what's going on in the argument. In the argument, you have a published paper that has made a conclusion. What's the conclusion that it has made? It says that, hey, tenured professors, so that's our group 1. So let's call this group 1. Tenured professors are those on their way to tenure, enhance student learning less than full-time lecturers. This is group 2 over here. Group 2 over here. Full-time lecturers is group 2. And so this is a data point that's given to you. I know some of you think, hey, there's a word conclusion here, so this has to be the conclusion. No, remember, in an argument, the main conclusion is always by the author. This is a conclusion by a research paper. This is a data point. It's a fact. Okay. Then the statement 2 says clearly the difference between professors and the other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system. So clearly is my conclusion marker, and this is what the author wants you to believe. This is his main idea. Yes, clearly is a conclusion marker amongst many other conclusion markers that you'd see in the e-GMAT course. Then the third statement over here, which is there, is written to make this statement more believable. So it's a supporting statement or it's a strengthener. It says the criteria for rewarding tenured faculty so we're talking about group 1 over here, typically places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Okay, so let's visualize this conclusion a bit more. Okay, so what, and it's always good, especially when you are in the beginning phase of your learning, to spend extra time to visualize the conclusion. Okay, how do you differentiate between a strengthener and a conclusion? Two things. First, it's a great question. Ask yourself, what is it that the author wants to communicate? What is the main takeaway from this argument? And when you ask yourself what is the main takeaway from this argument, what would you say? Is it statement 2 or is it statement 3? When you say this is what the author wants you to believe. The second thing, no, the second statement is not a conclusion. It is a data point. Remember, a conclusion is always disputable. Okay, what does the author want? So there are two ways to think about it, and both of them need to be true. One is, what does the author primarily want you to believe? Okay, what the author wants you to believe is the difference in between professors in the tenured system. The reason why professors don't do as great a job is because of the reward system. That's what the author wants you to believe. The second thing that you have to figure out is, why did the author write statement 3? Is the purpose of 3 to make 2 more believable, or is the purpose of 2 to make 3 more believable? Okay, if 3 is written to make 2 more believable, then clearly 2 has to be the main conclusion. On the other hand, if 2 were written to make 3 more believable, then 3 would be the main conclusion. This is what we call as the ABC test. Okay, when you apply that litmus test, you really see 3 is written to make 2 more believable. Why did the author write this? To support this. Is that clear? Three is written to support 2. 2 is not written to support 3. Okay, good question. So let's kind of visualize this conclusion over here. Okay. How do you differentiate between a strengthener and an assumption? Wait for one more question. You're going to solve it. You will be able to differentiate between an assumption and conclusion over here. For those of you who say my voice is breaking, my voice is actually perfectly okay. Remember, we're talking about real-time audio, and if you're on an internet connection, where you're using a mobile internet that is not designed to support real-time audio, at least not on a consistent basis. So yeah, some of you will really see that. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen on YouTube because YouTube isn't real-time audio. I won't be able to take so many polls over here. So yeah, for 90% of you, the audio should be fine. For that 10% where you're on a mobile internet, where you're using your cell phone's internet connection, you will find that the audio will break for a few seconds till the connection resets. Okay, so let's go about visualizing the conclusion over here. So what the author is saying is, hey, the difference between professors in the tenured system and the other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system. So what the author is saying is, he's blaming the reward system. He's saying the reason why professors don't do as great a job, remember professors were our group 1 and the lecturers were our group 2. The reason why group 1 doesn't do such a great job is because of the reward system that group 1 has. Okay. So again, the key thing over here is the author is not disputing the report's finding. The author actually agrees with the report's findings. He's just blaming that reward system for it. So when you read that conclusion, you have to put that context in there. You have to take that context forward. How many of you, when you were reading the argument, did that? You kind of infer that, hey, the author is not disputing this report's finding. He's just kind of building on that, and he's saying the reason why that the report has discovered what it has discovered is because of this reward system. How many of you did that? Yes, no. Again, good feedback for you. If you did not do it later on in the next question that you do. It's really important, and that's where I say read slowly. Don't just read. Same thing in RC, read slowly, because you've got to build these connections. Okay, this is what we call as the logical structure of the argument, or the logical or the argument structure. So statement 2, this is what the author is saying. He's saying blame the reward system. Why? Because professors, it seems, don't do as great a job as lecturers. So group 1 doesn't do as great a job as group 2 does. Why? And why do I blame the professors? Why? Because the reward system for group 1 places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. So I want to ask another question, and this is where you should need to understand why I've been so deliberate, still so slow over here, because You've got to build these insights while you are reading the argument if you want to get to that 90th percentile. Okay. This word greater, okay, whose reward system is statement 3 talking about? Is it just tenured faculty? Is it just lecturers? Or is it both tenured faculty and lecturers? Is it just tenured faculty? Then if you choose tenured faculty. Is it just lecturers? You'll choose lecturers. If it's both tenured faculty and lecturers, then you would choose both. Tell me, come on, let's get another 70, 80 responses, guys. Whose reward system? You've done this. You spent 3.5 minutes on this argument. I have 70 responses so far. Let's get 10 more responses. Whose reward system are we talking about in statement 3? Statement 3 is this guy over here. Whose reward system are we talking about? Almost 80 responses. One more response needed. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. 72% of you got it right. It is just the tenured faculty's reward system. But see, 27% of you said both. And which is where, you would go wrong in this. And you can see all the places where you could go wrong just by reading the argument. We've not even thought about pre-thinking. This word greater, it's a comparative word. It's comparing emphasis on research versus teaching just for tenured faculty. Okay. What it's saying is, and this is where you've got to visualize the statement is, for the reward system, maybe but 70% of emphasis is on research, which means 30% is on emphasis. That's what the greater is saying. We have absolutely no idea about the reward system for group 2, which is our lecturers. For those 30% of you who chose both, read this statement again. Can you really see we have no idea about group 2, which is lecturers in this? We only have an idea of about tenured faculty. Can you see that? Those 30%, I need them to say yes or no or whatever you feel like. No, how do you say statement 2 talks about both? I'm talking about statement 3, not statement 2. Don't go to statement 2. Statement 3 says rewarding tenured faculty. Forget about statement 2 here. My question was statement 3. Okay. All right. With that, let's go into the pre-thinking question. The pre-thinking question that we are really talking about. Hey guys, let's not disparage people over here. So the pre-thinking question that we're going to talk about is this: under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Let's kind of translate this question into the context of this argument, and this is what it is. Under what circumstances, conclusion breakdown means you can't hold the reward system responsible. Under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance, given that we already know that group 2 does a better job? Full-time lecturers enhance student learning better than professors do. And then reward system for group 1 places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching, which means 70% emphasis on research, 30% emphasis on teaching. Okay, that's the pre-thinking question that we're going to really do over here. So what are some of the falsification scenarios in which the conclusion will break down? If they figure out that lecturers have similar emphasis on research, if the reward systems are identical, then in that case, the conclusion will break down. Can you see that? If group 2 has an identical reward system, then you can't blame the reward system, right? Can you? Guys, yes, no, right? If you can't blame the reward system if professors have, if the lecturers have the same reward system. Remember, we are not disputing the facts in the argument. Those facts are like constraints. All we are saying is, given these facts, how can I break my conclusion down? One of the ways to break the conclusion down is if the second group has the same reward system, or another way, and some of you got this actually really well. The other way to break this conclusion down is if most professors do not act as per the reward system. So you can give someone a reward system, but what if they don't care about it? What if their actions are not governed by that reward system? In that case also, you can't blame the reward system, right? Statement number 2, do you agree? Yeah, let's not go into Latin, guys. Okay. So if these are the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, then what are my assumptions? My assumptions are, hey, my non-tenured faculty should not have an identical reward system, or most tenured professors should care about the reward system. Okay. Those are two of my possible assumptions. Now, one of the things that you would really notice is once you have the pre-thinking question, and once you visualize the conclusion, getting to these scenarios becomes very, very simple. But if you don't visualize the conclusion, if you don't have an understanding of the argument, you can ask the question, you won't still get the answer. Okay, so the basics are visualizing the argument and understanding the logic of the argument. Could it also be that the non-tenured lecturers are more knowledgeable? What you're really talking about is an alternate cause, and you're trying to allude to an alternate cause. That you can formulate an answer around that, but it would be a very, very long statement, something you're not going to see on the GMAT, where you say, hey, non-tenured faculty has some special characteristic, where you say more knowledgeable is that special characteristic, and that special characteristic gives them a leg up, because of which, you know, they do enhance student learning better. Yes, that's an alternate cause in this case. Research enhances student learning as much as teaching does. Break the argument down. That's a very interesting answer choice. So do you think it'll break the argument down? Yes, you feel so. Okay, that's true. Why do you think that is going to be the case? You're going into very sophisticated reasoning. I'm really happy to see that. So I like how you've done as much as, and indeed, you've done a great job in doing that. Had you really said research does not enhance student learning, that would not have been the correct answer choice. But because you used as much as teaching, what you're really saying invariably is that the reward system doesn't matter, whether it focuses on research or teaching. Why? Because both of them equally enhance student learning, right? That's how you translate that answer choice. And you say research enhances student learning as much as, correct? And which is why you are correct. Great job on that. And which is where, if you understand the argument, you can start to build these falsification scenarios. But the key is understanding the argument and then creating that falsification question. You guys are starting to have fun right now. I can see that. And again, some of you, how many of you were really saying, man, I am not at this level where I couldn't pre-think that scenario that someone thought? How many of you are worried about it, that someone was ahead of you in this? Because that was a sophisticated pre-thinking, by the way. And there's a reason why I didn't have that over here. Yeah, don't worry. This is a journey. Okay, and which is where I was a bit hesitant in tackling this, because it is sophisticated logic, and I want to keep simple logic over here at this point. Why? Because many of you have not gone through the foundation files over here. How do you tackle this huge list of possibilities? You don't. You just focus on the process, and once you focus on the process, the ability to evaluate such statements is automatic, because you've understood the logic. I mean, think about the student who was the guy who actually came up with as much as that particular statement. Who was the student who came up with? Can you say that? You did. Okay. All right. Where are you in your preparation? Or in terms of, did you just start preparing? If you did, then you probably are a very sophisticated thinker to begin with, or your ability is high. But if you're towards the fag end, yeah, or spend a decent amount, then you build that ability. A month and a half ago, he probably would not have been as precise. He would have really said research has no impact on teaching. But right now, because he's spent that much amount of time, you've reached that level of precision. So for many of you who are starting just now, don't worry about it. This is a journey. Okay. You know, the average score that people start at is 570. The average score that you know people aspire to get to is 730. So there's a huge jump that people need, and then you go through that journey. Is there always just one assumption? No. I mean, in the correct answer choices, yes, there'll always be just one assumption, but an argument can have multiple assumptions, yes. And you're going to see that in official questions. But the beauty of this is once you understand that assumption, even if you see other assumptions in the answer choices, you'd be able to select them right away. That's the beauty of this process. Okay. But can you really see how, as you approach towards pre-thinking, those scenarios can start to come up? Those pre-thinking, those possible assumptions can start to come up, and you can break through the clutter. But with this pre-thinking approach, would you stop when you find the answer choice, or you still go through all the options? That's a great question. It's all about momentum, and it's a great question. It's not an important question, I will just say this, but it's a good question. Here is what happens with pre-thinking. Once you get to so good with pre-thinking, the ability to reject incorrect answer choices just increases tremendously, which means that that 70% of your time, 75% of your time is spent with the argument and doing the pre-thinking. So frankly, once you find the correct answer, you're very certain, but then depending on where you are and how your timing situation is, you won't mind going through the incorrect answer choices. This app is actually way better than Zoom. This app is about 100x more expensive than Zoom. Try getting these many responses on Zoom. Try giving people this much feedback. If you don't have as great an internet connection, unfortunately, I can't do anything. If you don't have a good real-time internet connection, this app requires 1/10 the bandwidth that Zoom does. Okay. And frankly, think about it this way, right? How many of you have responded to so many polls on Zoom? How many of you have done that? You've responded to about 40 polls by this time. No. There's a reason why Harvard, Stanford use this app for teaching. Yes. It's difficult to type on mobile, but you shouldn't be learning on mobile, frankly. Okay. So, how many of you are worried about timing? How many of you are worried about timing and say, man, this seems to take a lot of time? Always. First of all, you shouldn't always be. When you attend next week's session, you'd hear me say that when it comes to timing, exam strategy, and all of that, that's about 10 to 15% of your overall score. Everything else is about ability. Okay. So here is how you're going to feel as you go through this cycle over here. Let's say you are at point number 1, where your accuracy to answer questions is in that low part. You can see this is what this maps to. And the time to answer questions is medium. And again, this is all relative. Why? Because I have 150 students here. Each one of you is going to be at a different time to answer questions. So the first thing that's going to happen when you start pre-thinking is you're going to go through this journey, which is, hey, your accuracy will go up because you're focusing more time on reading the argument, but your time to answer questions will also go up. So you're going to be like this guy saying, man, I already worried so much about timing. Why the hell am I doing this thing? Okay. And then some of you will rush through questions. Some of you will really say, I've got to fix timing and I've got to fix my accuracy right away. Any e-GMAT students who tried doing that when they were going through the files? Worried about timing and you tried to rush through this? Don't do that. Don't do that. You will not internalize things. Slow down. The more you slow down when you're going through the concept and application files, the faster you will be while solving questions. It's all about building that mental ability. It's all about having those synapses connect. It's all about retention of information. Yes, during the first stage, don't worry about timing. By the end of that first stage, your timing will be 80% fixed automatically. Okay, never worry about timing, as someone said. If you worry about timing, you will not see, or you will not learn. You will see those application file scores, those practice file scores drop in the first attempt on those files. For those of you who worry about timing, you will have seen that. You would have seen that observation. So that's what's going to happen. You should actually focus on the timing aspect when you get into cementing. But frankly, if you do things right, you won't need to focus on it because it'll fix itself automatically. And I'm going to talk a bit about it as to why we take longer. Okay. If you don't give up over here, you continue pre-thinking, a time will come, and for most people it happens between 10 and 30 arguments. And the reason why you have this wider range is because of the diligence, the amount of time that you spend per argument. If you spend more time per argument, you'll need fewer arguments. If you spend less time per argument, you're going to need more arguments. But if you give up, you're going to go back over here, by the way. Okay. But once, which means your accuracy is going to go down again, your time to answer questions would be there, but that time is all wasted anyway. And for those of you who continue doing this, your time to answer questions will go down, and your accuracy will continue to go up. And at that point, you're going to be like this guy saying, oh, now I understand why pre-thinking works. Why is it that 70 to 80% of all success stories on GMAT Club talk about pre-thinking? And that at that point, it's a point of no return. Hysteresis has already set in, and you're going to continue to improve over there. Okay. So really important. Now let's talk about timing. Why do we take longer to answer a question, guys? Why do we take longer? Has anyone thought about that? Why do we take longer to answer a question? Yes, when you don't understand the argument. What actions do we do when we take longer? What actions do we do? Reread. Yes, we reread the passage. How many of you reread the argument multiple times? Yes, that's what causes timing. Okay. So what does reading slowly do? What does reading slowly do? What does it do? It reduces the need to reread. What does pre-thinking do? It reduces the need to reread. Right? You pause at the right points. You understand that. You're addressing the cause. If I were to draw a parallel scenario, what happens when if you're infected with COVID? What's the first symptom? When you're infected? Fever, right? It's fever, you guys can say. Fever. Now, we know how to tackle fever. Then why is it that countries are at a lockdown? Why are we building a vaccine? Because tackling fever doesn't address the cause. The vaccine, building internal immunity, addresses the cause. In the same way, rushing through questions does not does not address the cause of timing. Reading slowly, building that ability to visualize, that is what addresses the cause. So focus on addressing the cause. Say you have 2 minutes to answer a CR question. Not say you actually have 2 minutes. How much time do you think you suggest pre-thinking before we move on? What was the definition of pre-thinking that I gave you? Do you remember? 15 seconds. I don't need to answer. It doesn't mean that tomorrow you will take 15 seconds. What it means is by the time you get to it, you will take 15 seconds. Okay? 15 seconds. That's it. And frankly, our results speak for themselves. When you go to our YouTube channel, you see about 150 success stories. When you go to an average test prep company's YouTube channel, you see fewer than 10. When you look at GMAT Club reviews, which by the way, each one of those reviews is verified using an actual score report, the same score report that you send to the business school, you would see about 200 reviews in 2020. The average test prep company on GMAT Club just had 10 reviews, if that. When you read the content of those reviews, 90% of all the verbal success was driven by e-GMAT. And about 80% of all quant success was driven by TTP. There's no other prep company that kind of delivered practically any success. Okay. How do you know if you're improving? That's a great question. You will know. Any e-GMAT students over here? Any e-GMAT students here? As you go through the course, how do you figure out that you're improving? One is you get the scores in the first attempt. The second is the feeling, right? You get to know you're learning how to apply stuff. You get better at understanding. Yes, that happens automatically. If you're learning, you will get better at understanding. You are much more confident when it comes to approaching questions. You definitely get to know. Yes. Yeah, the new quant course, everything's going to be in that learning architecture. Yes. And you're going to see word problems released by the end of this week or early next week. So, okay. Here is some more evidence over there. So yeah, we're seeing incredible success. And you're going to see a video about the new Scholaranium that we are building, which has incredible amount of AI built into it. That should be released by 10th of April. So yeah, just stay tuned on the YouTube channel over there. So here is something that you're going to see. Understand the passage completely. Here's one of our students said, understand the passage completely. Take your time. Equally important, pre-think an answer before looking at the answer choices. One term will have the most impact. Here's a guy who scored 740. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, we lost audio. Now I'm back. I had no idea why that is the case. This guy improved from 700 to 770. He improved from 30th percentile in SC to 97th percentile in about 20 days. And what he said is answer 700 level questions as if there are no answer choices, or for 700 level questions, you've got to do pre-thinking. Okay. The reason why that is the case is why? Because pre-thinking helps you focus and not deviate from trap answer choices. For those of you who are saying, I'm always stuck in two options, this is the response for you. Just click on his success story. You can download his ESRs. And as you download his ESRs, you can really see how pre-thinking helped him improve from that 90th channel, 35th percentile to that 99th percentile or so. Okay, you can click on number 2, Jim Yee, over here. So yeah, those links in PDF work. There's another guy who really talks about pre-thinking in the context of both CR and RC over here. Okay, so with that, let's kind of solve some confusing questions. We're going to solve our third example of the day. And are you guys ready with a pen and paper? All right, let's go. Now we're going to increase the pace of the session. And I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to answer this. And then we will go through this question. All right, here is my question. Let me just clear the prior poll responses. This is one question which has a ton of strengtheners built in. So you've got to remember what an assumption does if you were to get this question right. So this is an official question. It has a ton of strengtheners built into it. So identifying the correct answer. The argument seems very simple, but identifying the correct answer becomes very complex, and which is where pre-thinking will help you. Okay, here is the question. Good luck, guys. You have 3 All right, another 30 seconds, guys. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's get the answers and let's broadcast the results. So you can really see choice B is very popular, choice D is very popular, choice C is popular as well, as is choice A. Clearly, some of you were confused, right? The passage seems simple, the answer choices are very confusing, correct? Right? The passage seems simple, the answer choice is like, man, everything seems correct. This is a classical question where you have a ton of strengtheners and one assumption. Now, before we go on to solving this question, can you tell me what is the definition of an assumption? What's the definition of an assumption? What is the definition of an assumption? Can you guys tell me? Something that must be true for the conclusion to hold true, and something that must provide new information. Keep that definition in your mind as we go towards solving these questions. Okay. So what's going on over here? Let's kind of figure out the conclusion here. And this is where the conclusion is a combination of what's given in the passage plus what's there in the question stem. So what's happening here is we want to finance road repairs, and to do that, the Highway Commission is considering what a 50% increase in the toll. And what is the toll? It's 10 cents per mile. Okay. So a few key observations here. One is we're talking about a 50% increase. The second is the current toll is done on a per mile basis. Okay. Everyone with me so far? Okay. Yes. Then the Highway Commissioner, who chairs the commission, this commission over here, claims that the toll increase will increase the annual revenue by at least, at a bare minimum, 50%. Okay. And the question that we have is, what is required, what must be true for this claim to be true? He's making this claim over here that, hey, the overall revenue, the annual revenue will go up by at least 50%. All right. That's something that we need to visualize. So let's kind of, even though it seems very simple, it's always good to visualize this. What he's saying is, if earlier the annual revenue was 1 million, now next year the annual revenue would at least be 1.5 million dollars or rupees, whatever you want to really just say this. Okay. So how do we estimate annual revenue given this argument? In the context of this argument, how will we estimate annual revenue? What would be a simplified way to estimate for annual revenue? A simplified way would be cost per mile, toll per mile into the total distance traveled. Okay, that's really good. Everyone can see this. Annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by total distance. Right? Again, very simple. Toll per mile multiplied by total distance. That's it. Okay, let's go over forward. So we asked the same falsification question. Under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by 50%, provided that we already know that this number will go up by 50%? What is the answer to this question? What is the answer to this question? Under what circumstances would the annual revenue not go up by 50%, given that the total per mile is going to go up by 50%? The total number of miles comes down, right? That's the only thing. Total miles decrease. Yes. Everyone in line with me. Everyone with me so far? I want to make sure everyone is with me, because then the answer choice analysis will become very, very simple. Okay. Now, so total number of miles decreases. The assumption is the total number of miles driven does not decrease. That's basically it. Can you quantify this in all CR questions? No, this is in about 40% yes. But the other, remember, CR questions have a variety of scenarios, and you'll see that in the upcoming questions over here. Okay, let's look at choice B. Choice B is an incorrect answer choice. A lot of you chose choice B. Choice B really says, hey, the number of trips made on toll highway per year will not decrease from the current level. So the question really is, remember the first question the way we did, does this mean that the total number of miles traveled on toll highway will decrease? Does it mean that if the number of trips decrease? Does it necessarily mean that? No. Why? Because if the total trips go down, you could still have the same number of miles, if the number of miles per trip go up. So then is this a must be true? Is this a must be true? No, it's not a must be true. This is a great strengthener, but it makes you believe in the conclusion more, but it is not an assumption. For those of you who chose choice B, is that clear why choice B, the total number of trips made on the toll highway, will not decrease? That is not a must be true. All right, let's look at the correct answer. Choice E talks about the total distance travel. Okay, it's one of the factors which can be compensated by the other factor. Those who said, the person who said total number of trips is also a factor, yes, which is why it's a strengthener. But it can be compensated over here. Okay, choice E talks about the total distance. It's absolutely in line with our pre-thinking. The total distance decreases, this means the total number of miles decreases. Okay, and yeah, that's our correct answer. Let's look at choice C. Some of you also chose choice C. Choice C talks about the average length of the trip. If the average length of the trip, it's actually the opposite of choice B, choice C. It's the complementary piece of. If the average length of the trip goes down, then what can compensate for it? What can compensate for average length of a trip? More trips, yes. That's just what I'm saying. Choice B and choice C are complementary. Right? So both of them are strengtheners, but neither one of them is a must be true. Okay? All right. Would be, in some ways, yeah, it accounts for, yes. Why not A? Is the claim, does this have anything to do with the claim? Does A have anything to do with what the commissioner is claiming? What is the commissioner claiming? He's saying that he's going to increase the revenue generated by 50%. There is nothing that says that that revenue is going to be enough. Guys, you there? Does it have anything to do with the claim over here? Is it linked to the conclusion? No. Which is why A is. Okay, let's look at choice D. What does this mean? Constantly avoid. So let's kind of visualize choice D. Every time you visualize choice D over here. Let's say right now 100 drivers avoid the highway. Okay, it means fewer trips. What can compensate fewer trips? Greater number of miles per trip. We already discussed that. Okay, which is why. So choice B, C, and D, each one of these choices is a great strengthener, not a correct assumption. Yeah, you could have new drivers, but I mean, even if that's not the case, more miles per trip. B, C, and D again play on the same piece. E on the other hand has to be true. Why? Because you are paying per mile. Okay. Really important question over here. Very, very, very important to understand. This is a great question to understand that must be true part. Would you not agree? This is because of the option choices over there. You truly understand what must be true is. Okay, again, if you need that study plan, make sure you have those precise milestones. You have these estimates as to how much time you need to spend on this, and then you know what metrics to track. Where do you need to do cementing? Where do you need to go through stage one of learning? And so make sure that you get help with regards to your study plan. Once you get that, once you register for that study plan, and I will be happy to then go to the last two questions. What is the level of that question? 700 level. Okay. Oh, if the one-to-one mentoring is not available to book in March, I'm sorry, Sandeep. Can we see if we are all booked? If we are all booked, we just have a few people who we can help with. If there are no slots available, then my apologies. We will open up more slots on Monday. Okay. So again, write to me, and then we should be able to open up. It's just we can usually accommodate about 15 people a day. Um, One-to-one study plan is an option. One-to-one mentoring is something that we don't offer as a service. It's we don't do that today because that is something that costs us about $1,500. We do that as an R&D project. Our R&D team does that, but uh, uh, not as a product that we do. Our goal really with this is to enable our technology to do that, and which is where you get about 180 data point personalized feedback points in critical reasoning over there, and you have all of this education. So, so yeah, I mean, and you'd see that, um, which is kind of how we keep our costs low. Is this a test readiness session? No, this is not a test readiness session. You'll have a test readiness session when we do that. This is still a foundational session where we're solving some difficult questions. It might help you with some degree of test readiness, but no, test readiness is very different. Um, I can give you how to build similar test readiness quizzes over here. Okay, remind me towards the end of the session. I'll give you the test readiness quizzes. Okay, with that, we are now towards the last part of the webinar where we will solve some uber difficult questions. So the way we solve these questions is I don't time you guys, you time you yourself. So so the way we go about doing this is I am going to give you these poll questions here. I want you to select not answered, and then once 80% of you select an answer option choice other than not answered, uh, I call time, and then we go on from one question to the other. Okay, so let's get about 50 people to say not answered before I show the question. Okay, let's get about 50 people to say not answered. 44, 46, 47, 48, 50. Good. Let me remove broadcast results. And here is the question. I'm going to mute myself, guys, for another All right, guys, get those answers in. Another 30 seconds, guys. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let's end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. And you guys can see how you guys polled. Choice D was really popular. Choice A and B were also popular. Let's kind of go to the next question here. Okay, Shelby will refuse. Next question. I want not answered. About 50 of you to say not answered before I show the question. $48, $49, $51. Great. Here is the question, guys. Good luck. Another 3.5 minutes for this one. This question is not as difficult as the prior one, so yes, don't worry as much about this one. All right, another 30 seconds, guys. Most of you are kind of done. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. Again, We see choice D is very popular, as is choice C as well as choice E, and NB are reasonably popular as well. Now, these two questions are difficult questions. Let me just begin by saying this. I didn't expect you guys to answer these questions correctly. These two questions are difficult questions, but these two questions are also fun questions where, you're going to learn a lot from them. So, yeah, there's no 750 level plus question in my opinion, 700 level over there. But yeah, they're difficult questions. They're two probably of the most uber difficult official questions. You're going to see both of them are official questions as well. There's a lot of learning in this, and which is why I like them. Okay. So I'm going to actually do this question, and then Harsha is going to do the next question with you guys. So in this question, the RDS technology question, if you don't understand the question, you're going to have a very difficult time answering. These are all official questions from one of the older OGs. This question is actually from an older GMAT prep question. Okay, so let's kind of visualize this conclusion. The Shelby will refuse question was discontinued in 2019, but it has been in the official guide from 2009 till 2018. So and this is a GMAT prep question, beautiful question here. There's lots to learn. So let's kind of understand this over here, and this is both these questions. The reason why I like them is because they help you, or they force you to think, extract information, and visualize this over here. So this question is talking about radio technology. No one uses radios today, so they're not as prevalent. So you can understand that this is an older question here. If I were to rewrite this question, we'd have one with cell phones. Okay, so what's going on over here? So we're talking about, in this conclusion, we're talking about Verlanders, V's. Then we're talking about those Verlanders receiving special program information. And then what we're really saying is this number probably did not increase significantly but in these 2 years. Essentially what this is saying is, if in 1994 we had 1 million Verlanders who were receiving special program information, then in 1996 we probably had 1 million as well, give or take 100,000 or 20-30,000 here or there. So this more or less is the same. How many of you kind of took the pain to visualize this? Okay, that number remained the same. That's all that this is saying. Okay, that's good. Okay, so that's good. You did the first step over here. Now there's a lot of text on this. On the left hand side is the same argument. On the right hand side is what I see. So this is your main conclusion. We already visualized this. Now there are two pieces that help me lead to that conclusion, and the context in this argument is also very important. So between 94 and 96, two things happened. The number of transmitting stations, so RDS radio stations. What is an RDS radio station? Can someone tell me? In the context of this passage, what is an RDS radio station? It's a transmitter, okay? But what is special about an RDS radio station? What's special about this? How is it different from a regular radio station? It transmits special program information. I don't want you to go into wireless technology, but this is just purely, it's a special kind of transmitter. Why? Because it can transmit special, this special program information. It can transmit that special info. Forget about fast or slow. It's the special info. That's all that we know. Okay. Can everyone understand that? These special stations, that number increased from 250 to 600. Okay, so it transmits the special info. Okay, now the special info, as some of you are saying, can only be received by the right kind of radios. Okay, so the number of receiving radios, which is what people have in their houses or elsewhere through which people listen to programs, kind of remain the same in 94 and 96. Okay, so what these two statements 2 and 3 are saying is the number of transmitting stations increased, the number of receiving radios is kind of remained the same. Can everyone understand this? Is that clear to everyone? Okay. Now, can anyone explain why is the word however, which is a contrast word, why is that used in this argument? Why did the author use this word however? Why? Because you would expect more stations would increase more listeners. Yes, the guy who really said that. If you're putting in more stations, you would expect more listeners. Okay. And so these two things seem to go against each other. Okay. Can everyone understand that? The reason why the contrast is there is because you'd expect more listeners over here, but that remained the same. So which is why the author has used the word however in this case. Okay. Now, what this also means is that this statement supports the main conclusion, but if you have more transmitting stations, you should have more listeners, right? So statement 2 seems to go against the conclusion. Why? Because 2 seems to go against 3. 3 supports the conclusion. So 2 kind of goes against the conclusion, right? You have more transmitting stations, you expect more listeners. Okay. Now, what does statement 1 say? Statement 1, you already have said, hey, what is required to receive special program information? What do I need to receive? RDS what? You need a RDS pair. You need the transmitting RDS station. You need the receiving RDS radio, right? You need stuff RDS at both ends. Radio stations with RDS technology broadcast special program information that only radios with RDS feature can receive. So you need both the radios to be correct. If you have a transmitting radio but not a receiving radio, that's not going to work. If you have a receiving radio but no transmitting radio, it's not going to work. Is that clear to everyone? You need it. You need the pair, right? Is that part clear? I want to just make sure before I move forward. Because if you understand this, life is very simple. Okay. So here is the logical structure. Same argument over here. I'm just broken it down. Here's a logical structure. The context, which is my statement number 1, says if you want to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios and the RDS stations. Between 94 and 96, the number of radios kind of didn't change, which is statement 3 over here, but the number of stations went a lot, which is statement 2 over here. And based on this, the author says, hey, but very few additional Verlanders started receiving RDS programming between 94 and 96. Okay, that's what the conclusion is. We're going to ask the same question. Under what scenarios will there be a significant addition to the number of people who receive RDS programming, or program info you might call it, considering the fact that we have very few additional radios and considering the fact that we have a lot more transmitting stations? So how can I break the conclusion? Tell me some scenarios. You can't have more radios with RDS. This is very few additional radios, you're told. You can't go against the facts and the argument. More people in the household. Yes. When you say people in the household, what are you trying to achieve? When you say people in the household, what are you trying to achieve? Listeners per radio. More listeners per radio. Yes, more people listening per radio. So one scenario is that, hey, if we start putting these radios in Starbucks, then the listeners per radio go up. And in that case, we break our conclusion. Correct? Remember, the conclusion is about Verlanders. It's not about the number of hours each Verlander spends. It's about the number of people who are receiving. We start putting these radios in Starbucks. As the number of radios remain the same, but Starbucks buys it from people, then you get a greater audience. More people are listening to special program information. Or if earlier only one person in a family was listening, now 4 people in the family listen, that's something which is there. How else can I break my conclusion? Under what condition can there be a significant addition? Remember, the portion in bold is, what if there were people who had the right kind of radio? Remember what happened between 94 and 96? How many transmitting stations did we add? We more than doubled the number of transmitting stations, correct? If the listening range improved, if there were people who already had the RDS radio in 94, but were not within the listening range of an area, but now new stations open up in areas where people have lots of RDS radios, as someone said. You guys agree with that? If the additional stations now cover areas where people already had the RDS radio, but there was no coverage earlier, but now you added these new stations and you got there. Okay. Or if you start putting these radios in Starbucks. All right, perfect. So these are possible scenarios in which I break my conclusion down. So what are my assumptions? That the new station should not increase coverage, okay, or people per radio kind of remain about the same. Both of them are good assumptions. You guys with me? Right? This breaks the conclusion down. This prevents it from breaking the conclusion down. Okay, let's now go to the answer choice analysis. Can I explain the first one? Yes, the first one. Let's say you had 1 million radios in there, right? But only 300,000. Yes, you can't assume people are listening on the internet. No. Yeah. So you let's assume you had 1 million radios in 94, but only 300,000 were within the range of an RDS station. But now you added so many more stations. Now 800,000 are within the range of that RDS station. That's option. That's scenario one over here. Okay. Is everyone clear with scenario one? Okay. Now let's look at the option analysis. Choice A is my correct answer. I told you this is a difficult question. So as long as you were able to do this pre-thinking, you are fine. So choice A, let me see, this is how you guys polled. 17 of you chose choice A, which is the correct answer. It is in line with our pre-thinking one. Why will people have RDS radios when previously there were no RDS transmitters? How many of you have a 5G cell phone? How many of you have a 5G cell phone over here? Yes. How much 5G exists today? 9. Okay, you have people from Germany. People have looked at my LinkedIn profile. Some of you are talking Spanish. But there is very little 5G out there, right? Why did you buy 5G? Future proofing. We do that. Okay. Okay, let's not go into German, please. So, few, if any, of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting in Ireland after 94. So what are these? What are the RDS radio stations? Which radio stations are we talking about if we really say after 94? The new ones, yes. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios. Okay. What does this mean? They already have the right kind of radios, living in areas not previously reached. What this is really saying is almost none, few if any means almost none, of the new radio stations increase the coverage of RDS programming. Okay. That's what this answer choice translates into. Can you see this is what it translates into? Read this again. Read this again. Can you see the translation? Okay, see the translation now. I'm not talking about when you did it. See the translation now. Remember, you are here to learn. And this is where the learning happens. See the translation. Read it again. Tell me if you don't get it. Let's just do this again. Few, if any, is almost none. RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94 are new stations. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios not previously living in areas not previously reached is about increasing the coverage. There are 3 parts to this answer choice, and it's a complex answer choice. I'm telling you, it's one of the most challenging questions you will face. So if you got it easily, then kudos to you. But if you didn't get it, don't kill yourself for it. Focus on learning. And the reason why this question is, it is convoluted. It doesn't talk about the area covered. What does increase the coverage imply? Okay, guys, I don't want you to be scared of this. Okay. How many of you make investment decisions worth $10 million today? How many of you do that? How many of you make investment decisions worth $10 million today? How many of you do that? You wish. Most MBAs, once they graduate, if you go into a product management role, if you go if you go into portfolio management, what's the minimum size of portfolio that you would be handling if you go into portfolio management post an MBA? Typically, or let's not go into minimum. Let's call it about average. What's the average portfolio that you would be handling? Guess. 10 million is what they give to interns. The average portfolio that you would be handling is between 100 million to $1 billion. Okay, stock portfolios. Okay. If you're a product manager, on an average, you will be concerned with about $10 million worth of investment. Now, portfolio management, not as high risk as product management. So that 10 million, don't consider that, oh man, this is really lowly 10 million. No, it's frankly a $10 billion portfolio manager and a $25 million product manager for me are equivalent considering the risk. Yes, fund managers are more than $1 billion, many more. So the point that I'm trying to make is this may seem convoluted to you, but you build up to it in the same way where, managing $10 million a year may seem far-fetched. Okay. Guys, I love to make products. I don't like doing these talks. It's just, these are things that come in my brain. I don't plan for this, but yes, people have told me this, but I love building products, not doing this. Okay, let's come back to this answer choice over here. Okay. Almost, can you now see this? Can you now see this over here? How this translates to this? And then can you see how this is in line with our pre-thinking? Really important. That's the learning. Trust me, you get this. You may not have gotten this question right, but if you get this, you're going to get a bunch of other questions right that you solve post this webinar. So focus on, not worry about whether you got this right, don't worry about whether you'll be able to get this question right on the test. We are not there yet. Worry about, do you understand it now? Okay. If you want to do the negation test, the negation of almost none is at least some of the radio stations increase coverage. If at least some of the radio stations increase coverage, then the author can no longer say that hey, the number of landers receiving special program information in 94 and 96 is the same, which breaks my conclusion down, which makes this the correct answer choice. Okay, let's talk about choice B. And I like the statement says, I solved, the bubble needs to break, and it's about learning. It's not about a bubble. Trust me, guys. I don't solve CR questions for a month. I come back, solve a question, and I get them wrong. Sometimes I get that first question wrong, and that's the one I love, because that's where I learn, not solving those 18 questions wrong. Let's look at choice B. I'm going to explain every answer choice why it's wrong. Let's talk about this. Now, I'm going to go back to the same old routine. What is the definition of an assumption? Tell me again. What is an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Let's now look at this answer choice. Very simple. And focus on the process that I follow. This choice says, in 1996, most Verlanders who lived within the listening area of an RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. Let's kind of translate this answer choice into some numbers. Let's consider most to be 70%. Okay. Let's consider most to be 70%. Okay. Are you guys with me? Let's assume most is 70%. Yes, no? Okay. So if most is 70%, so what this choice is saying is, and we know that the number of radios between 94 and 96 didn't change a whole lot. The argument already told us that. So what this is saying is that, hey, 70% of the radio, people had a radio, RDS radio in 94, and 70% had an RDS radio in 96, right? Now my question is, don't go into frequency range, please. Let's not get that technical. And trust me, I'm a wireless guy. I can get 10 times more technical than you. So don't want me to go there. I was a wireless researcher. But what this is saying is that, hey, 70% of the people had an RDS radio in 94, 70% had in 96. Now, the question that I have to ask you is this. My conclusion is saying that the number of people in 94 and 96 who received the special program information, number of people who received special program information were the same in 94 and 96. So do I need the 70% number? Can the conclusion not be true if 20% of the people had an RDS equipped radio in 94 and 20% had an RDS equipped radio in 96? Do I need this word most? Do I need this 70%? Is that must be true? Is that must be true? Is that must be true? No. Why? Why? Because the conclusion is about the change in number. To maintain that change in number or to be zero, you don't need most people to have an RDS equipped radio. It's not a must be true. This is again a strengthener, not a must be true. People who chose choice B, can you see that? Yes, most is always about proportion. Most is greater than 50%. Okay. Let's look at choice C. Equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease a station's listening area. Can a station transmit RDS programming without RDS technology, without it having RDS technology? Yes, no? No. So, if it decreases the station listening area, what kind of programming is it decreasing? RDS or non-RDS? It's non-RDS, right? Because without adding RDS technology to the station, the RDS listening area is zero to begin with, and you can't have negative range. Again, don't go wireless on me, but in the context of GMAT CR, you can't have negative range. Are we concerned about non-RDS programming? In this entire conclusion, do we care? No. This is completely out of context, which is what choice D is also going to be. Let's go to choice D. Choice D says, in 1996 were landers who did not own radios to receive RDS. Do we care about those people? Do we care about people who don't have RDS radios? No. Could not receive any programming. Do we care about any programming? No, we don't. The conclusion is about the number of people receiving RDS programming. Why did you even worry about this answer choice? People who chose choice D. Can you see this? It has nothing to do with stuff. We don't care about RDS program, non-RDS programming. We don't care about people who don't have the right kind of radio. So, let's not worry about them. Again, choice D people. Is this clear? How do we identify when information is irrelevant to the conclusion? You understand the conclusion first. And then you understand the answer choice. It's important to visualize both. If you don't visualize both, you have an issue. I mean, if you visualize both, rejecting this answer choice is a piece of cake. Yeah, the non-RDS programs were transmitted in that area, but the conclusion doesn't care about the non-RDS programs. Right? I mean, in the cell phone world, the world that you live in, and the world that once I vowed to build, you know, if the conclusion is about watching movies on cell phone, and through a certain cellular tower, and this choice is talking about getting text messages, do you care about getting text messages from that tower? No, you won't. When you say non-RDS programming, it's about getting text messages. The conclusion is saying watching movies or on your phones. No, don't care about getting text messages or calls or Twitter updates. Okay. And which is where I say learning, focus on learning. You go back after this session and you really say, hey, why did I get it wrong? Let's revise this again. Trust me, you're going to get 5 more questions right. That understanding that you would build, that visualization ability, that connection of neurons that would happen in your brain will help you with this. Option eliminates other sources of this information. No, how? There are no other sources that exist, man. Look at this. Look at the argument over here. When you say to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios, how the hell are there other sources? The argument is telling you there are no other sources. The author is setting the context for you. Can there be other sources? No, the context is there. Type of programming, not a problem. You're not concerned about the type of programming, you're concerned about the number of people. Okay. Yeah, communication is only possible within this. Harsha, over to you now.
All right. Thanks, Rajat, for that. I think after that question, this question should be somewhat easier. First, let's do a mic check. If you guys can hear me, just put yes or Y on the short answer pod. Let's make sure that you guys can hear me. Perfect. So let me just broadcast the results of this particular question before we begin discussing this. Where is Shelbyville? There it is. So we're going to discuss all the options. Don't worry about that. So option A is slightly popular, C and D very, very popular, E also somewhat popular. We're going to discuss all of this. So let's go back to the argument. So let's start with the very basics. Everything we learned today is about start with the conclusion, understand the logic, visualize the conclusion, understand the logic, then you do pre-thinking. So you guys tell me, what is the conclusion for which we need to find an assumption here? Let's start with this in this particular argument. What is the conclusion? That's the question. Is it really about recycling of waste, or is it something else? To reduce it to half? Absolutely. So here the conclusion is in the question statement. It says which of the following is required for the revamped collection program to achieve its aim. So the question then you should be asking is, hey, what is that aim? And that you find in the argument. It tells you that in order to reduce the amount of ash to half of last year's total, that is the aim. You want to reduce ash to half. So the conclusion is that this aim will be achieved. We need to find the underlying assumption for that. Everybody clear on this? Because conclusion is the starting point of all analysis. All right, good. So if this is clear, now let's kind of go to the argument and understand the logic of the argument here. So what do we know? Last year, all the refuse, so this particular diagram shows you the refuse. Last year, all the refuse was collected, everything was sent for incineration. So it was collected, it was sent in truckloads. Let's say that what you see here, those garbage bins are your trucks. So quick question for you. This is just an example. How many trucks do you see here? How many truckloads in this particular example? Absolutely. So let's say all the refuse last year was sent by these trucks to incineration. So around 10 truckloads. Now, what is this conclusion all about? The idea is to reduce this ash by 50% to 50% of last year. And what is the author telling us as the collection program method? To separate enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to half of last year's number. So, or in other words, if you had 10 truckloads last year, how many truckloads this year? How many are we expecting to see? Absolutely. You guys are all on track now. Now, if you guys have understood this, I have one more question for you that's very, very important. So everything we discussed now, it works well when you're talking about the same quantity of refuse. But now I have a question for you. What if the refuse increases by say 10x? Say you had this quantity of refuse the last year. Let's say the refuse increased by 10 times. In such a situation, what would be the number of trucks which will be sent for incineration? Let's get your answers in. So this is a very important question. If you get this right, you would have got the crux of the argument right. Few more responses, guys. Last 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right. So now I'm going to end this poll and let me broadcast the results because they're very interesting. So 40% of you went for the option choice that is D, which says, hey, now 50 trucks would be used. And 26% of you went for 5 trucks. The answer to this question, by the way, is 5 trucks. And this is where, if you really pay attention to the way the argument is written, this particular argument is all about the beauty of language. Let's look at this last sentence. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. What that actually tells us is, hey, whatever be the quantity of refuse that is being brought in, whatever is the amount of refuse, it does not matter. Even if the refuse is 5x, even if it's 10x, I'm going to recycle enough to ensure that the number of truckloads is half of last year's number. Do you guys see that now? Focus on how the sentence is structured. Or in other words, this refuse could have been 100 units last year and now it's 1000 units. It does not matter. I sent 5 truckloads last year. I am going to send 5 truckloads this year, whatever happens. If you understood this, some of you can already figure out why option E is probably not the right answer. You guys would already be seeing it now. So if this is clear, now let's move to understanding and pre-thinking for this particular question. The logic is clear, the conclusion is clear. Let's talk about pre-thinking. So our conclusion was very clear that, hey, the plan will work. That means the ash generated is going to be 50% of what it was last year. The logic was very simply that, hey, I am going to send half the number of trucks. If I sent 10 trucks last year, I am going to send 5 trucks this year, irrespective of what quantity of refuse is generated in the city. And if you really frame the falsification question for that, you would simply say, under what scenarios or under what conditions would the ash generated be greater than 50%? Because your conclusion is about 50%, despite the fact that you are actually going to send only half the number of trucks. So what would be the correct answer for such a question? With this framework in mind, with this falsification question, let's try to pre-think. What would be your falsification condition? In what scenario would this happen? On the short answer pod, guys. Perfect. I can already see some correct answers coming in. Let me broadcast the results here. So the condition where this would happen is the ash generated per truck actually increases. What if that ash that is being generated per truck is going to increase? In such a situation, you would actually see that it breaks down. One of you also said, what if the refuse burn had materials that produce more? It comes to the same meaning. You're perfectly right. Maybe the chemical composition of ash this year is such that the ash per truckload will be greater. So I think you're also on this exactly the same concept here. So the only situation where this would happen is if the average ash that is generated is actually going to be higher than what was generated last year. Is this clear? Because last time I sent 10 trucks, I got so much quantity of ash. Now I'm sending only 5 trucks. Typically, all things being equal, you should have seen a reduction in the ash by the same quantity. Why will it not happen if somehow that ash per truckload changes? Good question. When the truck size is same, how will the ash be more? We don't know how much ash is being stuffed into the truck. Maybe earlier they were only stuffing it to some level, but now they start cramming more ash into the truck. More, not ash, but they start cramming more refuse into the truck. Possible, right? Good question. But fundamentally, the only possible scenario where this can happen is if the ash generated per truckload is somehow higher than what it was last year. So what if the material is not recycled? You're already given that we are taking out a lot of the recycles, things that are being recycled. So therefore your underlying assumption is quite simply that, hey, the ash per truckload has to be similar or lower. In both cases, this particular conclusion can still hold true. So there you have it. Now let's go to the option choices. So let me bring back how we performed in these questions. Let me clear these answers. All right. So option A is somewhat popular. Option A, I think in the start of the session, Rajat mentioned that there are two fundamental characteristics. One is that it must be true. The other is that it also has to bring in information that is new. Option A is an example of an option choice where definitely it must be true. If you think about it, what option A tells you is, hey, this year, no materials that the city services could separate for recycling will be incinerated. Or in other words, anything that you separate will not be incinerated, which is definitely a must be true thing. If you actually take out what you're separating for recycling and still dump it into the incineration pile, then your conclusion breaks down. The entire plan makes no sense. Your plan breaks completely. So it's definitely what you call as a must be true statement. But the problem with this is it's not new information at any level. This is something that you can get from the passage. What do you mean when the argument tells you that you are separating for recycling, and what you separate obviously does not get into the incineration pile? That's inferable information for you. Fundamentally, whatever is being separated, you're not sending for incineration, right? So isn't this information that you already have? Is this new information at any level? For those of you who chose option A, is it clear why option A cannot be the correct answer? It satisfies your must be true condition, but it does not bring in new information. You already know that what is being separated is not being sent for incineration. So that's the reason about option A. Let's come to option B, which 9% of you chose, but option B talks about the cost. Is this argument concerned anywhere with cost? The conclusion is about reducing the ash. It has nothing to do with cost. And this is option B, therefore, should be an easy choice to eliminate because the argument does not concern cost at all. Which brings us to option C, which is slightly popular. But if you have followed what we discussed in the logic part of it, now this should be clear why option C is not the correct answer. Does it matter what proportion of the refuse is recyclable? Maybe it is 10%, maybe it is 40%, maybe it is 70%. It does not matter because whatever it is, last year I did not do any of this recycling. Everything was sent to incineration. And this year, I am going to be separating stuff thanks to recycling for enough to be ensured that I will anyway send only 5 trucks. My number of trucks is anyway being halved irrespective of what this proportion is. So does this proportion really matter? Whatever that proportion is, whether it is 40%, whether it is 70% recyclable, I'm going to send only 5 trucks if I sent 10 trucks last year. Is this concept coming through? And that's the reason option C is not the correct answer. It's what you call as an irrelevant option choice. Those who chose option C, is this clear? The point is, last year you were not doing any recycling. This year Whether it is 70% or whether it is 40%, you don't care. You're being given in the argument that whatever refuse is available, I am going to be separating enough to ensure that the number of truckloads comes down by half. So most is recyclable or most, it really does not matter. Perfect. Which brings us to option D, which is actually the correct answer for this question. So if you guys followed the pre-thinking, you can see why option D is right. So it says the refuse incinerated will generate no more residual ash. The key learning here is, if you guys had visualized this, if you guys had visualized the argument and done the pre-thinking for this, arriving at this option choice is going to be very, very easy, right? You would have found it to be a very easy exercise. Definitely easier than RDS, trust me. So the negated option D simply says, hey, the refuse incinerated this year, it is going to generate more ash per truckload. And in which case, definitely your conclusion breaks down. Because even though the number of trucks is half of what it was last time, each of those trucks is going to generate more ash. And if that is true, your conclusion breaks down. So option D is the correct answer for this question. Another popular option choice was option E. And option E is fairly easy to eliminate for those of you who followed the question that I asked. 10 times more refuse, 20 times more refuse, it does not matter. Even if the total quantity of refuse increases, it's greater than ever collected before. Does it matter? I'm still going to send only 5 trucks. Do you guys see how option E is incorrect? Absolutely. Those of you who did not choose option E, does it make sense? Do you guys see why option E is the only correct answer for this question? Perfect. So with that, I will hand over the session back to Rajat for the further portions. Over to you, Rajat.
Yes, thank you guys. You guys can still hear me? So option E, I can explain this once again. Option E talks about the total quantity of refuse. Now, one thing you've got to make sure you understand is that, hey, what generates my residual ash? What generates my residual ash? Incineration, right? No, not waste, incineration, burning, right? Only burning. Something that's not burned doesn't generate ash. Okay, so what's told to us in the passage is that hey, the amount of residual ash, the number of trucks that we're going to send for incineration is going to be half of what it was last year. If this year I'm only going to get 5 trucks for incineration, then it doesn't matter how much refuse I collect, which is kind of the question that Harsha asked. Even if you collect 10 times as much refuse, you're only going to get 5 trucks for incineration. Okay. Thank you for the appreciation, guys. All right. So with that, let's kind of talk about what should you do next. Now, you solved some really difficult questions in this webinar. You learned a number of things. But this learning needs to be churned, it needs to be cemented. And to do that, I want to make sure that for you understand that this is A, the beginning, and B, it's not difficult. It's not rocket science. It's methodical. As long as you cement the various steps, as long as you learn how to visualize the conclusion, as long as you build the logical structure, as long as you visualize every answer choice, you should be able to pre-think. So if you're a new student, or if you're a free trial student, make sure you go through the first 3 files: Introduction to Assumption, Pre-thinking, Logical Gap, and Prethinking Two entities. These are different argument structures, but with the same pre-thinking question that we do. And this would help cement this. As you go through these, you'd go through about 15 arguments in this. Then make sure you go through the Assumption Practice File 1. If you're a paid student, and if you've not gone through the Assumption module with an attitude of learning, please go through it again. You will have gone through, once you finish this, about 50 arguments just in assumption. And then trust me, you should be set for 50% of critical reasoning if you do this. Okay, but do it with an intent to learn. Each of these gives you feedback. Each of these gives you a score. Appreciate that score. Also go through an entire concept or application file in a single go. So reserve an hour for it. You might end up taking 35 minutes, but if you reserve an hour, you will not rush through things. Really important. And when we say it's designed to ensure learning, our purpose to exist for the last 3 years is to replace a private tutor. So which means that we feedback built into it, where you first learn concepts, you get feedback on concepts, then you learn application right then and there, and then you go through qualifying exercises, which is kind of where you see concepts, application, qualifying exercises. But there's feedback here, feedback here, feedback here, and feedback here as well. So please use that feedback to perfect your learning. And just to really tell you how comprehensive this is, but 10 times as comprehensive as Manhattan CR, and about 6.5 times as comprehensive as Power Score. But this is just the full length questions, not the example questions that we're talking about over here. But this doesn't take a lot of time. I mean, here's an example of a student who achieved 99 percentile on verbal. She improved from V32 to V46 in about 20 days. Another guy who improved from 570 to 740 over here, and what Karthik said is language has a way of manipulating your mind, and the GMAT's really good at it. This guy is a physics instructor. He says just spending that extra 5 to 10 seconds trained him to think about questions and to be able to think through options. And this is where you would have experienced as well. It was the language that tricked you. The logic wasn't super complex, but the language is what makes it complex. So go slowly, and you can watch some of these. So Karthik's interview, you can watch this over here. If you click on this, and you can see how he's gone about this. Hanupriya's interview, you can watch this here as well. So again, go through these files and ace the GMAT in about 10 days or so. Again, remember we have so any questions at this point, or if you could give me feedback on the webinar, that'd be great. And also remember we have upcoming free webinars actually very soon. Shreya says so that January was wrong file. Let me just open the right file for the upcoming webinars. So we have Mayank's session, which is this Thursday, the following Thursday on 18th of March, and then we have the algebra session tomorrow. Why is it that we go forward? Yeah, as well as the GMAT strategy webinar next week. Okay. Shreya has a question. She says she's an e-GMAT student. She's done really well in the files. She got the RDS technology question wrong. Shreya, I can tell you that GMAT instructors get this question wrong. I think Harsha got this question wrong as well, but as long as you got all the other questions right, you're still at 97th percentile, so don't worry about it. Okay. So you're fine. I can tell you this also, if I remember correctly, Chiranjeev, who's now a private instructor, was a part of e-GMAT. Chiranjeev scored a V47 or 780 on the GMAT. He got that question wrong too. So yeah, don't kill yourself for getting that question wrong, Shreya. When a live session is going to be available, we are evaluating this. I'll tell you this. Most people who go through the courses properly don't feel the need for live sessions, but we will strategically add more and more live sessions over here. So yeah. How do you apply for the upcoming sessions? Just register for the sessions. They should pop up on the e-GMAT on the e-GMAT account. Also on our homepage at the bottom, we have a widget where you can go for it. Yeah, so I think that's how you register for the upcoming sessions. You can click on the register now button to do that as well. Okay. VG says, I'm going through the CR modules, but the time has not reduced. I think VG, you should really look at why is it that the time has not reduced. Again, remember I said, what does timing constitute of? It's about rereading the question. You have the need to reread the question when you don't read it well the first time. So if you want to reduce the amount of time, slow down. Tell yourself, I am not going to come back and reread. Trust me, do 5 questions that way. You will see your time coming down. So In fact, we had people who did that in RC where they would challenge themselves, and these are students who got 740, 750 scores. They would challenge themselves and say, I'm only going to read the RC passage once. I'm not going to come back to it. And it was really difficult for the first 8, 9 RC passages. But then, man, the kind of improvement they had, it was incredible. 7 a.m. in Pacific. So the 7 a.m. Pacific, it's tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. IST because we have daylight saving time. So from tomorrow onwards, 7 a.m. Pacific over here is 7:30 p.m. IST. Let's just go over here. This is 7:30 p.m. IST. Okay, or I think this translates to about 3 p.m. German time or Europe mainland time. All right. So VG is saying he's spending 2 minutes. You're not spending time to read. That's wonderful. But if you're taking 2+ minutes to understand the passage and Prethink, that's good. That's good data point. So focus on this to really say, hey, where is it that you're taking longer? Are there certain terms in the conclusion where you're taking longer to visualize? Again, break that down. It's really important to break it down to figure out where you're facing problems. If once you break it down to figure that out, usually solving that is not an issue. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. It was wonderful hosting you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the algebra session tomorrow. Goodbye and have a great day. And also the recording of this would be on our YouTube channel. I will also post a few more questions on our YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. And also solve questions. I think last week we posted 6 questions on our YouTube channel. The coming week we will again post 6 to 7 questions. All right, guys, with that, thank you very much and have a great evening or a great day if, like me, you are in the US.